The journey is conversations with ordinary people about stories of transformation and how we may have had setbacks in our life and how we persevered through those, how we've learned from those obstacles, and how they've maybe helped us on our path today. Well, welcome to the journey. My name is Kevin Polky, and I am the host of the journey. And we have a special returning guest, Anna Marie Candelario, was here just a couple weeks ago, and she talked about her adventures as an educator, as someone who has really kind of found her way into this space of being an educator in multiple different systems, and then recently had some setbacks. And in that, as an educator, and then today we're going to have Anna Marie on to explain what did she learn so far about that setback, about herself, if that she wouldn't have learned if that setback wouldn't have happened. And I know, like many things, this continues. It's not a one-time test, right? It just continues. So Anna Marie, it's great to have you back on the journey.
Thanks, Kevin. I again keep seeing your praises, except I think I might have some competition via online.
Yeah.
Dr. Pate Hefty said she's your biggest fan. So
Oh, well, Carolyn is she is awesome, and it's been a
Yes.
while since I've seen her outside of being online, and so she's awesome. She was how we originally met, is when she was the
Yes,
director, I think director of special ed then, right?
that's correct. She
Yeah.
was the executive. Yep, she was the executive director of student services.
Students there. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
All right. So why don't you kind of fill us in? I know last time you were here, you kind of gave a little bit about gave your background, and that was 2 episodes ago, and
Mhm.
so yeah, 2 episodes ago. And so maybe today we can kind of, talk a little bit about, and obviously, just like you did last time, not super there's no real need to be sharing, names or anything like that. It's just more
Yeah.
about that experience. So why don't we kind of just jump in? You had, when you and I worked together, we were at Maywood School District, and then you had left that school district to work for another district. And what was your role there at the district after Maywood?
Yeah, so I was the director of individualized education services, um, aka director of special education.
Okay. Okay.
Yes.
And with that, so that for the ones that may not know, what does that entail? What's the primary role as a director of special education do?
Sure. So, in that particular position, when I first began, I worked in coordinated services with all the assistant principals in the district. However, that model really didn't work out well. And so, during my first year, I took a lot of data to suggest that we needed some additional layers of support. So, I oversaw 6 to 7 coordinators who then supported the schools. And then we had a little over like 300 special education staff because we had close to about 1,400 IEPs in the district. It's fairly a large district in size, so about 19 schools and a couple of therapeutic schools. So really supported the schools and also administrators and the coordinators, and then all the different layers of like related service providers. So speech, OT, social work, psychologists. So all of that. And then on top of that, I also did some student services work. So oversaw like the district crisis team. So when we would have to go in and create any triage plans, I also oversaw like the threat assessments, DCFS calls, as well as Title IX. I was a Title IX investigator. So I took on a lot of special education work, but because of the individuals that are part of the special education world, like psychologists and social workers, then I did a lot of that crisis work that was involved traditionally under like student services.
And I know the last time when you talked about Maywood, that you talked about that was a high um, minority population, high poverty, a lot of there was a lot of families that in that particular school district that may not have had good experiences with the school systems, historically with them as well. And so that generationally was part of the experience at Maywood School District. In comparison, in this school district, similar, different, how would you
Yeah. It was still considered urban. However, it was kind of split. We did have, quite a bit of students of color, free and reduced lunch, a lot of students, experiencing, mobility issues, like things like that. However, because of the location, it was truly the land of the haves and have-nots. So we're talking about like $1 million house, and then next door you may have apartments. Like, so we really had an interesting dynamic
Mhm,
where everybody was fighting for something. And
mhm,
even individuals who may have didn't have the resources, the community was able to provide them the resources. So I worked, they have like advocacy centers or, legal aid centers, things like that. So people had access to things. So it was constant like battle between those groups on top of all of the racial work that was happening in this area. So it was quite intense.
sure,
The
sure.
dynamics, yeah.
And you were in this role with this district for how long when you left?
I was there for around like 2.5 years.
Okay, okay,
Yeah.
gotcha. So maybe then kind of, I mean, obviously, as you talked about, you know, in the last episode, that a big part of your identity had been about, and similar to myself, had been tied into achieving, right? And taking tasks on, being able to, find solutions for those things, and ultimately wanting to help people. But there's, as we've talked and you talked last time, the balance between how much energy you're putting into the career and work and then trying to do the same thing at home, was happening at both ends, burning things at both ends. And so when you think about how things had, now looking back on it, how things had built up to like a critical mass, what do you think back now about what factors may have lead to that kind of, that there were some definite events that happened that tipped things over, but as we know, there's usually things that lead up to it that make it that tenuous.
Yeah. Oh man. So I would say, um, well, one, the dynamics of the community. So that was a huge one. So what I mean by that is that fighting, they would bring it to every meeting, to every parent concerned. So all day long, although it may have not seemed like a crisis, everything was a crisis. And so I was wrapped up in attorneys, dealing with attorneys all day, um, fighting for services. People were fighting for services. And then the key piece was the lack of trust in the community. So you can imagine how long it takes to build trust with somebody, and now multiply that with all the parents that came across my desk, all of the staff that came across my desk. And so not only was I trying to help with the problems that we were um, experiencing, but I was also trying to build this level of trust that the community hadn't had in a really long time in regards to special education. It had a really bad rep prior to for me coming here. It was getting better, um, but it was definitely still a layer of like significant mistrust. And so that was the first thing I was doing. I mean, Kevin, when I was I think about my first year, I was my plants died in my office because I was constantly getting yelled at on the Zoom. Plants don't do well with negative energy. So, so I was constantly getting yelled at on the Zoom, and I was in a revolving door of meetings back to back to back, to a point where also the staff didn't see me until like 7 months into me working. They're like, "Wow, you're really tall." I'm like, "Because you didn't see me, because I was just wrapped up in Zoom meetings all day long." And and then just getting yelled at, and even the staff. I mean, it took me a while to break through to the staff. I mean, I was getting yelled at from the staff. I got booed off stage one time from a group of staff. I've had staff lash out to me, like fully like yell in my face. And you know me.
Mhm.
I was like, I'm just here to help. I don't know what I did. I'm just here to help. So they were just unleashing all of that they had, that history on me. And I was just taking it all in, taking it all in. And then I brought people on board with me, and then they became the next layer of taking it all in. Um,
Ah,
yeah.
okay.
So that was the beginning.
Yeah. So, I mean, I can relate to that. I've had a situation where there's so much history that I inherited that, and I was seen as one of the corporation, one of,
Mhm.
I represented this, I represented them, right? They were all us, and then I was the representative of them. And that I remember that going, this is not this has not been a common experience for me when it had to do with large numbers of people, and we're talking, months later, and it doesn't seem like I've made any progress.
Yeah, yeah, and that's what it felt like. And you just keep going back to work. And there were moments where I had conversations with my supervisor, and I was like, I don't know if I could do this. Like, all
Hmm.
I keep doing is I'm working in reaction. I'm just reacting all day. Is just reacting. And then also doing a lot of that crisis work. So on top of that, I talked a little bit before is that there was a lot of teachers that were and staff and students having some significant mental health crisis in the buildings. And because of my training and I worked really closely with another director, we were constantly the first ones there, like always dealing with that. So you have the part where people have this lack of trust, and then you have where you are getting called in because they don't have anyone else to de-escalate things. So
Hmm.
it's very very interesting role I was in, but because I did those where I had to step in to help with crisis, word got out that, oh, she's not such a horrible person. She's here to help.
Sure.
And so it did help, but it didn't help my psyche, that's for sure.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, thinking about, again, this is looking back on that time period,
Mhm.
and obviously it is, you're tenacious, you're extremely resilient. You eventually are going to win people over, right? I mean, this is Anna Marie, right? I mean, so this is that part of you is all those inner things that were driving you as well. When you look back on that, what are some things that you go, if you knew what you know today, what would you've told Anna Marie then?
Huh. Um, there's a difference between passion and purpose, right? Somebody, a mentor told me, um, don't let your passion overpower your purpose, and that's what happened to me. I was kind of blinded by my passion. I was just keep going, make it through. That's the only way to fight against the system. Is just keep going, bring people in, and have them keep going. And we got each other. As long as we got each other, we can keep going. That is not true. That is not true. I mean, and we had each other. We had a family. We had a family. It was me and the coordinators, and it was us against the world. And eventually we stopped seeing ourselves. We stopped taking care of ourselves.
Mm,
And so there's also this fine line of you're building this team, this community, and yes, I'm lean in on each other. We are an individualistic society, but I think we leaned in and with my direction a little bit too over to the family, the community side, because individually we were all experiencing different things,
mm,
and it took us down.
yeah. And I think that we could probably see that in other other areas as well, right? When the need is so high and the commitment of the individuals is so high that we could become blinded by that passion and because it's we've already been practiced at self-sacrifice anyways,
Mhm.
so it's really easy uh not to take time to ground yourself and really have your bearings. So kind of then bring us to the place where that this is building, this is happening. You have people who are your friends, people that you are colleagues that you brought in as these coordinators now, and there's this belief, right? That's why you invited these people to come in, that you guys together could change this. But there was something that then started happening, and maybe share a little bit about what was the breaking point for you.
So, as leaders, we can tell somebody, and I mentioned this in the last podcast we did, is that I let my people know that if you're not at 70 or 30 or 100%, that I would pick up the other pieces. Except there was this level of they believe that, but they also didn't want to disappoint me. And again, I will take ownership of that culture I made. And because of that, one of one of the individuals experienced, a mental health break, and it was me who had to get to her first, because she was about to take her life, and that was probably the hardest thing that I had to be faced with because, traditionally when I would work with students, we would drop them off at the hospital and they would go through crisis work and we would be there. But to see somebody that I cared about so much fall apart and have to witness that was forever changed my life, because I felt guilty about how she ended up there. I thought immediately after I dealt with all of that, that it was my fault as a
Mhm,
leader. Why didn't I see it coming? Why didn't I tell her, to step away quicker? Why didn't I change the roles and responsibilities for her? Um, and so that's something that it took me months to break through. It was what my therapist called it, a pain point that I had to work through,
mhm,
um, because of that. And so with her, it was another one of somebody I worked with was with me during that, and all three of us were now trauma bonded. We all experienced that, and so when I had to go back, I literally went back to work after that, and I told my supervisor what had happened. I went back to work, and I like went on like nothing happened, except now things started happening to me at work. I was losing my memory. I was not able to handle stress the way I was able to. I was melting down at home. I was having panic attacks at work. I was like easily triggered by all of these things. I could not keep up with the work. I was making mistakes that I normally would never make. That I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so like black and white when it comes to special education. Like, how am I making these mistakes? Um, and so all of that was happening from April to September, and with
wow,
no support. All of
mhm,
those things that I just mentioned were occurring. And then on top of that, the other person that experience was with me, went on leave as well because of
mhm,
that impact.
okay,
So yeah, that was the turning point, the big turning point, you know.
okay. So what you just described, and for anybody's listening, what you just described is a true definition of burnout, right? And so, we'll people will overuse that term, when they're tired or they're frustrated about something or don't think something in their work is going to change. But I think burnout can happen for a lot of different reasons, but what you just described, the symptoms that you just described, behaviorally, physiologically, mentally, emotionally, those were all different symptoms of how we can be impacted by burnout, and then a system that we want to impact and want to change, and we have such value tied into the people. but the system is bigger than the individual sometimes, and and then it starts coming out sideways. So when you think of, on top of it, right, then
Mhm.
it sounds like you're saying that the people who were either above you, regardless of how many layers above you, either one didn't see it or chose to ignore it, and so there was no then support coming from there.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
And no one, and this was something that, as a leader, to pay attention to when your um, employees start acting differently. My behavior, my characteristics were the same for 2 straight years, and all of a sudden, I'm acting differently, um, and I'm getting, I'm not getting that understanding in return. So I would say, as a calling, if your employee is acting different and had consistent behavior, it means something.
Yeah. Well, and it's such an interesting thing you talk about. I'm preparing to do a talk here in taping a talk for the in the next week or so.
Mm.
And the title of the talk is taking your team's mental health temperature, and being able, like, what is their baseline, and then being able to take, I mean, just like us as normally, right? What I don't know, I don't take my physical temperature until I don't feel good.
Right.
And if I use the same thermometer, if I would actually take my temperature when I'm feeling fine, then I would know what my baseline is.
Mhm.
So, but not everyone's baseline is 98.6 or
Right.
98.6, 98.6 with this particular thermometer. So if my baseline is, let's say, 98, and I am registering not feeling good, and I'm registering it at 99.5, even though that's not in 100, the odds are I'm, I am, I have some grade of a fever. And so because I'm already, normally my baseline is zero point 0.6 below the average, or whatever the suspected average is. And so I think it's similar to emotional and mental health as well, is that, what is your staff's baseline, and then when they're consistently acting off that baseline, we need to move toward them. We need to be asking questions. So when you think now, and well, you said something earlier that I don't want to let go of, that there's times when we do things, we talk about that, doing something out of ignorance or doing something out of malice. And
Mhm.
malice can be self-serving. It could be, it's intentional to do something, life taking, right? And that
Mhm.
sometimes can be, not telling the truth. It could be not addressing something, whatever it may be. And that, obviously I choose to run the red light. That's out of malice, right?
Mhm.
I'm spacing out and I don't see the red light because I'm looking at the green light that's two lights down. That would be, an accident out of ignorance, right? And so both can result in an accident, both can result in harm, and in both cases, I still have to try to work toward forgiveness. And so when you think about your journey of healing now, and the person who those two people that were affected were friends of yours, let alone employees, what have you learned about the self-forgiveness process?
I mean, they're adults. That's what my therapist said. They're adults. Like, they could have made their own decisions at any point, right? And so I can't take ownership for their own behavior. I could take, into consideration my behavior and how I was part of that. But I can't blame myself for someone else's behaviors and their feelings and their perceptions. Um, and that's what I needed to work on. And that was a hard point to work on because I felt that I sold them this dream and I sold it really good. And I lied to them. And I lied to them. I lied to them about this dream. And I felt so guilty about it. And I had to let that go. It wasn't, it was real what I believed in, my passion and my purpose. It's real. Um, and it was okay and people could get behind it. And I'm not at fault for that. And so I had to let that go. And it's been hard. The one person that I was super, super close with, it took me a while to even see that person because it was just guilt, and guilt is so heavy. Um, and all of the great times and all of that, guilt consumed that. And then the other person, I just was so strong, and this person is always so strong. I felt like now I gave her another thing to have to be strong about, and so it was working through that. And so yeah, and forgiveness is so hard. I know I told you like in the last one, like healing is so hard, but it needs to happen. Forgiveness and forgiving yourself is so hard because it's just so much easier just to hold on to that pain because then you've it's almost like punishment, like you're punishing. I'm going to hold on to this pain because I deserve it, right? And so um having to let that go and say I deserve to heal and deserve to move forward, that took the longest time.
Sure.
It's
Yeah.
been a year and I think I finally just realized it.
Yeah.
So
Well, and I think, your therapist is doing an awesome job. And,
she's amazing.
yeah, and, we can intellectually know that, right? We intellectually know, when they say to you, you're not responsible, they're grown adults, you're not responsible for their choices. And we can go, oh, yeah, 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 I know. But
Mhm.
that doesn't mean internally we still blame ourselves because I was the leader. And I think that grounding was perfect, right? Is that at the end of the day, yes, as leaders, we do have accountability and responsibility of communicating and of checking in and taking that temperature. That's all true. At the same time, we can't know what we don't know until we know it. And we still have to recognize that people they're adults, they have choices.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
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 true.
so Anna Marie, when you think of, again, that's the big piece about what when you think of not only this, having healthy boundaries, being able to, work through the process of forgiving yourself, as well as obviously work through the process of forgiving others, which, as someone who is a servant leader, as someone who is, who works hard and prides herself on working hard, I imagine that's all been challenging. What other things do you think you've learned through this experience, and now how do you find yourself giving back the things that
Yeah.
you learned from this experience?
So we used the word in the last session setback, right? It was a setback. I was about to leave education. I was looking for jobs outside of education because I thought that's the stabilization that I needed. Um, and I was going to say, this is it, it's a setback. Um, but then I had to look at it from a different angle. And sometimes we need that hit rock bottom to start looking at things from a different angle. And I did. And I was like, well, you know what? When you think about special education, and that's all I've known for 17 years, it's kind of like at the end, right? Like you go through all these tiers of support, get special education, and it's at the end. I was like, I need to get at the beginning. How do I
Mm,
get to the beginning? And I was like, oh, a job came up to work with student teachers, mentoring, build a residency program. I was like, oh, I could be at the beginning. I could help develop teachers so that they don't leave. I could change the system at the very beginning. And I could start putting humanity into education the way that I wanted to when I was in special education, but it was too late. And I don't have the team, or I don't want to say I don't have the authority yet, to really fight against that. So let me get in front of it. So that was the first thing. I had to
mm,
change the way my way of thinking. Um, and then the second thing was, when I moved into this job, and I said this before, I'm not used to people being nice to me. I'm not used to positive praise. I'm not used to people highlighting me. Um, And when I came here, everybody was so nice to me and everybody was giving positive praise. I presented at a board meeting and they were using words like impressive and this has never been done before. And I was in shock. I was like, are you talking about me? 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 And I was like, people are starting to see me. And like, that is the thing. I thought I was in places where people saw me. I wasn't there. I wasn't in those places. And now I'm in a place where I am being seen and valued and cared for. And although it feels weird because I'm not used to it, it's a thing. And so many people stay in places because they feel like they have to stay there because of time and years and money. But why? Like, leave. Go to somewhere where you can be valued. There's jobs out there. Like, you could. Like, there's somebody out there that has a seat at the table for you. You just have to view your setback now as a comeback. And
Right.
that's what I started thinking. This was my time to come back,
Yeah.
and this was my comeback. And that changed in thought as well. Was super helpful and powerful for me.
Well, and I think I do think, and I know this has been kind of our theme that we've been discussing today and have in other episodes, is the idea that setbacks are part of life. Learning from setbacks is a choice.
Yeah.
Learning about yourself in those setbacks is really that ultimately that choice. And it's only in that space of that setback can we then make a, a major significant change. Like instead of being at the special ed piece of it, maybe
Hmm.
I need to start at the beginning of the continuum and see how can make an impact there. And I think that, that's a huge thing, right? And then again, now you're being valued and appreciated for what you do, and you're contributing to the system, and they're appreciating it versus resistance because this is, we don't trust, and because they're coming in and they want to be developed and they want to grow, and hence why they came into the profession, right?
Yeah. And gosh, there's so much animosity in education right now.
Mhm.
Like I hear it from teachers telling future teachers, like, don't get into education. I'm burnt out. You don't want this to be your life. And it's like, no, we're perpetuating this idea of that the pandemic and policy and all of that is setting back education where we all just stopped and reframed our thinking and said, this is a comeback for education.
Yep.
Like the pandemic erased everything we did and we believed in. We have a blank canvas, just like I was a blank canvas. We have a blank canvas to rebuild it. So let's start thinking differently and start doing things differently so that we can move forward. That's where I get tripped up here in education.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting you talk about that because the term self-care, right, is so overused, and people have such misunderstanding about what self-care is, right? They think self-care is exclusively, taking a day off of work or
Mhm.
having, 10 minutes, a meeting shortened by 10 minutes so that you can then go do something that you want to do. I'm not saying that those things can't be helpful, but to me, self-care is about lifestyle. Self-care is about having and developing and continually working on tools for physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual growth and development. And it's not about, yes, it does have to do maybe with setting boundaries, but it also has to do with development and growth.
Yeah.
And so I know, and I can't, go without saying this. I saw just recently, last week, that you were honored with an award. So tell us a little bit of what the award was, and what did that? Yeah, tell us a little bit about the award you got.
So I was nominated by some former and current colleagues for the administrator spotlight for the Illinois Association of Latino Administrators and Superintendents. So there's ALAS is a national organization for Latino administrators and superintendents. So Illinois, they have their own chapter. And so I was recognized as an administrator spotlight for supporting the well-being, equity, and empowerment of our staff. And so that was the first real award I ever received. I had no expectations, and I don't know if you can see it over there. It's over there,
Yeah.
my thing in the shelf, the glass one. And it meant so much to me. It means so
Yeah.
much to me.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it was a really, really cool Friday,
Yeah.
and I had colleagues there to support me, and my heart is still so full, and I'm still smiling from Friday, but
Yeah. Well,
it's amazing.
Well, Anna Marie, you without a doubt definitely deserve that. And that is
Thank
not
you.
just for what you're doing today in the position you're in, but that is how much you've been valued historically by your peers and by people that you've worked with in the past. So very well deserved. So I'm grateful that you, as you said earlier, are being seen and you are in a space where you can thrive right now.
It's wonderful.
So yes.
Everyone should try
Yes.
it.
Well, and it's funny because what you were saying earlier obviously goes into a lot of things. It goes into relationships with a significant other and how we settle in certain relationships. And if they're not going to, the relationship isn't going to change, we need to honor ourselves, and maybe we need to either take it to that next level, or maybe we need to change something, right? And similar to a job and that isn't about, I'm not talking about promoting divorce or ending of relationships, but there's times when we are in toxic and abusive situations. And if the person is refusing to change, or the system is refusing to change, then we have to be able to exercise that choice to take care of ourselves and make sure that we're safe. I don't believe that's about quitting. I believe that's about leaving one room and going through a door to another situation, similar to your case. So, Anna Marie, I always appreciate you and having conversations with you. And I know that we have some meetings coming up for you and
Yeah.
I, and I'm looking forward to that, and looking forward to seeing if I'm going to be able to help you with some of your new things that you have planned for your staff. So, uh,
Humanizing education. I'm taking you along for the journey, Kevin.
well, and to be honest with you, that is my next chapters of what I'm going to be doing so
Yeah.
it's perfectly aligned with what I'm going to be doing as well, and I'll be making those announcements here soon as well. So, Anna Marie, thank you again, and we'll be talking soon.
All right. Have a good one.
So, just as Anna Marie just shared her story about that, sometimes we will have blind spots because we stay somewhere too long, or we become so engrossed in trying to make a change happen. Um, we we have to step back and ground ourselves to take care of ourselves, or we're not going to be able to take care of the ones that are right in front of us. So, similar to what we've heard almost every time that you're on an airplane, we have to first take care of ourselves, and all that that means before we can take care of others. As always, thank you for being here, and I look forward to being with you next week.